Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We saw a resolution being moved in the upper house of parliament with a view to delaying the elections. We'll be talking about the effectiveness, about the relevance of this resolution and what it means, the ramifications of it to the elections of February 8th. Of course, we've since had the Election Commission say categorically that the polls will happen on the due date, February 8th. And of course, the Info Minister also echoed the statement that it is for the state institutions that will determine, as far as the Election Commission, that will ensure that the elections go forward as per law. We'll be talking about this. We'll also be talking about a little later on Article 62 and its overall purview, which has been talked about for a while now, in the view of the pending judgment that is scheduled to come anytime now. In reserve, what can we expect and what are the purviews of this article, what are its overall its ambit, all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Saif Jamshed Baryar, who's a political analyst. Thank you for being with us today. We also have Ali Jabir, who is a journalist. Thank you so much for joining us today. We also have with us Muneeb Qadir, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for being with us today. We'll also be joined by other guests. Let me start with Muneeb and then I'll move on to the guests in the studio. Muneeb, overall, as far as this resolution is concerned, you know, of course, the legality of it is one thing. But in your opinion, why at this time should a resolution of this kind have been moved in the upper house of parliament when we are, you know, nearly a month away from the election date, with the election commission moving on in terms of the scrutiny, in terms of now the candidates that are going to be announced on the general seats by the different political parties? Why now, in your opinion?
I think that certain political players might be not very certain about their success in the upcoming election, and it's something that, you know, the Chief Justice has also lamented that various politicians are trying to uh, avoid or delay elections, and so there have been election delaying tactics. And it's worth noting that out of the 100 members that there are in Senate, there were only 15 present during the session. So, I mean, there is also a question as to the legitimacy of this resolution. Of course, you know, this resolution is not binding, not legally binding either. And it has been opposed by senators like Afnanullah or, even I've heard Murtaza Solanki Saab. So the thing is that right now, citing security issues or weather related issues as an excuse, and that's the word that I'm using very consciously, excuse, as an excuse to avoid election on the set scheduled date of 8th February is very unfortunate. And I hope that as the guardians of the Constitution, the Supreme Court shall make sure that the election shall take place in a timely manner, because in Pakistan the situation is always precarious, whether it be, you know, related to weather conditions or security conditions. But that should never allow us to be, you know, to be delaying elections, especially now that they're long overdue.
Right, let me come back to you. Saif, even otherwise, you know, when we look at, does it not contribute to an overall, you know, perhaps to the situation overall, you know, the way that it's looking at this time, it makes it more volatile, it makes it more, doubtful, so to speak, as far as the elections are concerned. Why do it at this time? Do you agree
Mahrukh,
with
firstly,
what Muneeb is saying?
yeah, I'd pick up where Muneeb left. In fact, there are 100 members in the Senate, right? And this was a resolution that was floored by one particular senator, Dilawar Khan Saab, and he had support of other 15 people. So I think, apart from it being non-binding, it is something that is non-representative as well. It's not representative of the entire upper house. And furthermore, at this particular moment, like you said, it's rather a volatile or a very uncertain time. And maybe such resolutions, or maybe such, political optics at the very highest level of the lawmaking body, that is the Senate of Pakistan, I think they'll add further uncertainty to the ground realities of the political pessimism that already prevails.
But do you think there is already an uncertainty at this time?
Incredibly uncertain, and I think with this resolution being flowed in, I think every TV show today would be debating upon that. I think every corner meeting would be addressing that resolution. I think every side, whether it's A, B, C, whether it's left to the right, whether it's the left-wing parties or the right-wing parties, whether it's the parties that have always upheld the supremacy of the constitution, or whether it's the parties that have allowed certain discrepancies within the legal process as well and the constitutional process, I think they'll all be debating for the future. Because as far as we know, after Nawaz Sharif's coming back into the political optics of the country, and after Bilawal gearing up for the seat of the Prime Minister, because yesterday we heard the news that People's Party has okayed the name of Mr. Bilawal Bhutto, and they are very much looking forward to an election. And if I take you back 3 months ago, I think People's Party was already saying that there might be a certain happening at the end which would result ultimately in a delay. So I think a delay doesn't favor any political party. It doesn't favor the PMLN or the People's Party.
Ali, do you think that things are any more uncertain or any more volatile than they have been in the past in many elections in this country?
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Since the start of this caretaker setup, our country and our democracy is passing through a transitional phase. But we have to realize one thing, that Senate of Pakistan is part of your legislature. Your bicameral legislature is unicameral at this moment, and it is the only body, constitutional body, to oversight the legal matters of the state. If you need any legislation, Senate has to guide. It's a very prestigious house of the parliament. But unfortunately, the legislation, the resolution presented today was totally contradicting to its role. And one thing we have to look very closely here is that since it's not a binding document, but it is a suggestion to the Election Commission of Pakistan that they can consider these concerns of the legislatures, that there is an uncertain situation in the country. But my argument is that in 2013, during those elections, security risks were much higher than today. Apart from weather conditions, weather is just a lame excuse at this moment. Yet if you can hold polio vaccination campaigns in Fata, in glaciated locations, but you can't hold polls in this situation, but just citing an excuse that
Do you think it's about readiness for a lot of political parties, for those that are supporting a delay? It seems to be about readiness, isn't it true?
I have another take on this question as well. From this one movement, there's a very positive note that People's Party, PMLN, PTI, they together are condemning this resolution. People's Party termed it a conspiracy. PTI termed it a disgraceful move. And then PMLN, it straightforwardly rejected this resolution as a lame excuse. This is what the hope is for us, that since despite all these activities or machinations of some certain elements, there is positivity for democracy. There is hope among the political parties who are ready for elections. Despite PTI facing whatever their claim is, their so-called victimization, but despite all those things, they are ready for the
They want to go
polls.
forward and they want to move. Let me go to Muneeb. Muneeb, as far as readiness generally is concerned, we are talking, certainly with regard to this resolution, that's one thing, but also with regard to different political parties, what is your opinion on the overall readiness of all political parties, this close to the elections? If we look at the past, the way things are at this time, how do you look at it?
I feel that all the political parties, at least those which were not involved in the 9th May controversy particularly, and which have been law-abiding by and large, they are very much geared up for the upcoming election. And the dark horse which has turned out to be in the unfolding of events recently has been People's Party, led by Chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. It's because I mean, on a personal level, I had never imagined that he could be able to garner so much popularity going by at least his social media posts and the amounts of crowds that he's been able to pull in his conventions and rallies. I did not really see that coming, but he's really connecting with people in different parts of the country, and not just in Punjab as well, where he's been holding conventions recently. So I think that everyone is in that election mood right now, and PMLN seems to be very confident as well.
Are we in the election mood right now, in your opinion?
Are we as the electorate, as the voters?
Is the country?
perhaps the situation in the country is not the ideal situation in which to hold elections, but it's never been. I mean, since 2022, we've been seeing extremely tumultuous political periods, political upheavals. So people mentally speaking, psychologically speaking, they are in that frame of mind that they really want to cast their vote, and they themselves are ready. And I believe that there would be a lot of public backlash if the elections were to be delayed any further. So yes, to that extent, everyone is who is a stakeholder, either as those who are standing for public office and those who are actual potential voters. I believe they're all ready for the election.
Saif, do you think that's true? Do you think that the public is ready to vote?
I think, Mahrukh, I'll pick up from where you asked that, are we in that election mood? Now, there are two things. There is an election mode and there's an election mood. Now, I firmly think that we are not in an elections mode right now, but we are in the elections mood right now.
Okay.
The common person wants to go out on 8th of February. They want that public holiday, and that public holiday will be deciding the fate of the next 5 years. I genuinely believe that I think it's the first time maybe in Pakistan that a caretaker setup is becoming more prominent than a constitutionally selected setup. Now, whenever a caretaker setup comes in, the psychological nurturing of politics in the average voter is that this is something temporary. It is here to stay for 3-4 months, and then I'll decide the future. Now, when you take the right of decision of the future from the average voter, then what sort of democracy are we standing for? So I think this entirely puts at stake the entire future of 250 million people and their democratic optimism that is embedded by the 73 Constitution.
And also, when we talk about a body like the Senate, when we talk about the role that our parliament has to play, it has to exercise, whatever right, whatever, their constitutional right is, with some caution. And when we see these kind of resolutions happening, Ali, it definitely goes, it's not something favorable as far as the Senate itself is concerned, or any parliament, whether we talk about the upper house or the lower house, for them to go out on a limb and have resolutions like this. There has to be more responsibility, no?
You're very right in that. Either we are in the election mode or mood or not, but the fact is we will have to hold elections, because elections will decide the fate of our country. The situation in the region at the moment, in the Middle East, in the Asia, in the Central Asian Republic, in the Indian Ocean, that demands us to have a strong government machinery. Without National Assembly and without all the provincial assemblies, we are not able to hold that system in proper place. We won't be able to give the proper legislation and state response to such diplomatic upheavals that we have to address very vehemently. So if we are not going to have our polls, just for instance, you see your state structure will be powerless. Caretaker setup will not be able to manage the administrative affairs of the state. So we will have to prepare ourselves for the polls, despite all the odds. You see, Maulana Fazlur Rahman Saab has been attacked, his convoy was attacked, Amal Wali Khan, and both these leaders are facing threats. But despite that, did these two leaders have claimed that they are not going to be participating in the elections? No. They said they will participate in the elections, but they have the concerns on the security situation and they want the quarters concerned to address this issue. Our political leadership, despite from their party affiliations, they are in the favor of in holding the polls, but such kind of resolutions are just a distraction to distract the minds of the common man. This single resolution, either it won't be having any constitutional impact, but the psychological impact that it has created through the media, the traction it got, this would have really, confused or perplexed the voters that there is going to be a conspiracy to delay the polls. And if these elections...
That's what I'm saying, the perception that it sends out to the people is a very negative one. And any house of the parliament has to be cognizant of that. The people who are there, the elected body, or even the Senate has to be, the members of the Senate, the senators have to be cognizant of the effect of such a resolution at this precarious time, this close to the election.
Speaking in the parliamentary language, this is repugnant to the role of the Senate. If Senate is the representation of the federation, the unity of all federating units, but this resolution has divided that unity. You see, there is great criticism against those senators. what kind of unity this House is presenting if the Chairman Senate is not allowing the Information Minister to give his response. He was the relevant minister as the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs. It was his job and task to respond to this resolution, either it was right or wrong, but he was not allowed to present his opinion, which is very strange and against the norms of the House of the Senate.
I want to also move on and talk about the next, topic as far as Article 62 is concerned. And of course, we are at this time, the judgment being reserved. Overall, as far as the purview of the article itself is concerned, that's also something that, of course, the political parties are waiting for. As far as the decision overall is concerned, we've also seen criticism on, overall, and as far as the ambit of 62 is concerned, the interpretation, of course, we're waiting for it. Overall, how are you looking at the proceedings at this time, Saif?
Mahrukh, I think just 14 hours ago, I read that the verdict has been reserved so far.
Yes, it has.
And I'll be honest, I'm not that much specifically expert at interpreting the law. But as understanding the law as the citizen of Pakistan, this article was in fact used and manipulated by dictators. That is something that is a reality in front of all us. And I think today, if we need something in clarity, that would be once and for all end the debate of 62 and 63. Because every elections, we have to bring this up. And what happened to maybe PMLN Supremo back in 2017, absolutely synonymously, something like that happened to the PTI chairman in the Tosha Khana case as well. So I genuinely believe that maybe we're heading towards a legal clarity. If you look at the idea of the law, the custodian of the law and the creators of the law, they are the parliamentarians. But the protectors of the law and the people who are to give clarity to the law, that is the judicial apparatus of the country. So as far as the proceedings are concerned and as far as the verdict is reserved, I think the idea of lifetime disqualification will once and for all be buried. And I think political parties will get clarity and people will get a lot of clarity.
Let's hope so. I am going to go to Barrister Safi Ghauri and then I'll come back to you. Ji, Safiullah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly well.
Safiullah, this your opinion about this article as far as Article 62 is concerned, and overall, the way that the court, of course, we will have the judgment very soon, I think. But in your opinion, how are you looking at the proceedings till now?
It's very interesting, Mahrukh. So I think the proceedings are some of the best proceedings that we've ever seen. Firstly, because it was televised and the video is also available on YouTube. So the public can watch it without having to go to the courtroom as is normally the case. But that's not the exciting bit. The exciting bit is looking at it from a legal perspective and seeing why this is such a big judgment. Now, before this, the decision in the Sanaullah Baloch case in 2018 by the former Chief Justice Saqib Nisar was that this is a lifetime disqualification. And this was not an ordinary bench. The bench that gave this decision was comprised of Saqib Nisar, it had Umar Ata Bandial, it had Justice Azmat Saeed, at least 4 former Chief Justices of Pakistan apart from Justice Ehsan. And these were all big senior judges who gave a very lengthy, elaborate judgment explaining why they expect a parliamentarian to be above others and how Islam applies, and they basically went through the entire history of jurisprudence of Pakistan and what comprises democracy and the intersection of democracy and Islam. So it was quite interesting. Now, once again, we see judges debating that previous judgment, pointing out reasons why that judgment was flawed and how the premise of that judgment of making sure that a parliamentarian is Sadiq and Amin was not the correct premise. And this is interesting for many reasons. It's not just interesting for legal and political reasons, but also for Islamic reasons. Because it raises the central question of what kind of a country Pakistan is. If we are a predominantly Muslim country, or if we are an Islamic country, then how does Article 62, 63 apply to, let's say, non-Muslims? How about the fact that when Justice Qazi Fazisa brought up the fact that there were many people who were adamantly against Islam. They were waging wars against Islam, committing crimes against Islam, trying to hurt the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and yet when they converted to Islam, they became caliphs. So even they were not disqualified in Islam. How is it then that anybody who's disqualified can then be disqualified for life? And even more interesting is the idea that what's who is to determine who is Sadiq and who is Amin? Is the court fully competent to give such decisions? Can they make a decision of the sort and bar a person for life? And because this is in itself also another form of punishment. Let's say I've committed a crime and I've been convicted of that crime. Now the punishment of disqualifying me from elections is yet another punishment. This is the punishment that I do not deserve because the law clearly lays out the punishment that I deserve. And then what happens if I commit a small crime versus a large crime, as was pointed out by Justice Mansoor Ali Shah? The fact that, if somebody commits, let's say, does not pay their taxes, they get disqualified, and somebody who commits a murder and then pays diyat can still qualify. So what is the metric here? The metric is clearly not defined. And it's really amazing how the Supreme Court has now, for the first time, gone through the entire length and breadth of the Constitution. Great constitutional debate going on, but also apart from the constitutional debate, the political and the Islamic aspects of the state of Pakistan. So I'm really enjoying myself thoroughly. I think this is going to be one that future students will read about, and it's very educational, that's for sure.
But it's also, as far as let me come back to you. I want to talk more about, of course, the effect of the judgment, either way, on the political scene at this time, and how close we are to the elections at this time. I want to come and talk more about that. Let me go to Muneeb. Muneeb, are you with us?
Yes.
Muneeb, overall, as far as this judgment is concerned, there are, of course, the issue of disqualification, is very central to the electoral pace, electoral, the way that the things are shaping up in the next polls. So that is one thing that we are waiting for. In the meantime, again, we are looking at resolutions like the one we saw today happen in the Senate.
Yes.
Overall, these issues are, very close to the election day. So in that sense, do you think perhaps that these are the reasons why we haven't seen the momentum build up as much as usually it does around this time before the elections? Isn't that true?
You're absolutely right, and I believe that our readiness for the election, and even those who are going to contest election, that is intertwined with the verdict which we are awaiting from the Supreme Court, because the ghost of lifetime disqualification, how Article 62, even Article 63, the impact upon political careers of those hoping to go into parliament or public office, until they are put to rest, we just cannot move forward. And now we are almost 4 weeks away from the election. And for example, one is not sure about what fate is a person like Nawaz Sharif going to meet. I mean, his nomination papers have been accepted recently by the returning officer, but ultimately, is he eligible to contest election or not? Because there is a Supreme Court judgment saying that he's disqualified from holding public office for life. And on the other hand, we've got the Elections Act 2017, which says that there can be no disqualification beyond 5 years, under which then, Mian Nawaz Sharif would automatically be eligible, or not, and not just him, of course, many other people like Jahangir Tareen. So revisiting the previous jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, as it is being done with regards to the Samiullah Baloch case, is of the essence right now, and it's a race against time, something of which the Chief Justice is very much aware of. I mean, he has just said that he's going to announce his verdict shortly and very soon, and he's even indicated that by 11th January this matter ought to be resolved. And the thing is that the bent of mind of the top judge right now seems to be that the Constitution, because it never specified any particular time frame for which you could be disqualified. My question as an observer of the law and as a citizen of the country is that if the Constitution has not mentioned anything like lifetime disqualification, does the Supreme Court's verdict, for example, in the Panama Papers case itself, does that become the Constitution? Or is it merely an interpretation of the Constitution? And if the interpretation is erroneous, if it is wrong, then I'm sorry, but that needs to be revised and that needs to be overturned. And that means that the Election Act, the June 2023 amendment that it brought last year, where it said that the maximum duration for disqualification under Article 62 could be 5 years, then that becomes valid law and that supersedes any judgment of the court, because the judgment of the court is not the constitution itself. It's an interpretation of the same, and the interpretation could also be wrong. And a last point that I would like to add here is that certain revelations were made by the likes of Barrister Hameed Khan, who had cast doubts on the legitimacy of the Nawaz Sharif disqualification case in 2017. And also Mia Saqib Nisar had said that the clean chit that had been given to Imran Khan back in 2018 as him being Sadiq and Amin was not something that was made in its entirety. I mean, he was not declared Sadiq and Amin in entirety. So one also needs to be sure that this whole idea of who is honest and who is Amin is not weaponized so as to score political points against politicians in accordance with the political climate or political mood of the country. You can't do that. There has to be consistency.
Fair enough. Let me go to Saif. Saif, overall, of course, trying to make sure that there is consistency, that, of course, it's in line with the constitution, it's in line with the principles of Islam. All of that, of course, is the responsibility of the judges, and they're going to make a decision. But as far as the political scene is concerned, of course, we are looking at the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif Sahab, who is, also, whose fate electorally is hanging in the balance. There's also Jahangir Khan Tareen, who's again, also head of another political party at this time, very much wanting to go into the polls. So in that sense, it does contribute to an uncertainty overall.
Mahrukh, you're absolutely right. I'll use a little of logical wisdom here. Honestly speaking, there is nothing like judicial supremacy. The only supremacy that there can be in a democratic republic is constitutional supremacy. Judicial supremacy is a derivative of constitutional supremacy. Let's at first understand that where did the idea of a lifetime disqualification come from? It was an amendment that was made during a martial law.
Yes.
So first let's contest the very fact that during a martial law, if an amendment is made, then what's the credibility of that amendment to begin with? Okay. And then let's talk about the lethargy of all the political parties who have taken charge of this country's political affairs since 2008 and never have they once amended that. Now let's come on to the second logic over here. After the Elections Amendment Act, now you tell me whether a 5-member bench is more politically correct, or is a 326-member Parliament House, Parliament of Pakistan more politically correct? I think when it comes to political wisdom and comes to the idea of political legislation for deciding the discourse of 250 million people, it has to be done by the parliamentarians.
Yes.
Now third, let's come on to the third logic here. The third logic here is that if even the Election Commission of Pakistan or even the Election Tribunal doesn't have the prerogative or the privilege of dismissal for life, then where does the court stand in deciding dismissal for life or a ban for life, or whether to determine what should be the ideal time period for a disqualification? So I think the idea of that very case in 2018, it was nothing but judicial activism. And I think that maybe this particular case that is going on in the Supreme Court right now, the individual merits to be discussed later on, but the verdict reserved so far, it at least for a while brings death to judicial activism. And I think for political certainty, we need to be giving clarity to the political voters not only, but the leaders of political voters as well. Noon League's Supremo, his political future hanging in the balance. Look at Jahangir Khan Tareen, like you talked about. And then even let's talk about Tosha Khana case and Imran Khan's idea of disqualification. So I think the constitution doesn't allow for a lifetime ban, and it was nothing but a judicial activism by 5 members who overruled the collective wisdom of a parliament of 326 people.
Ali, do you agree? You think that perhaps it's had to be done, it should have been done much sooner, if we see a verdict in that vein, as far as, doing away with lifetime disqualification?
Being a journalist, what I feel is that we have to understand the context behind this entire amendment. This was basically introduced by General Zia-ul-Haq. And that was just a tool of arm twisting of politicians. So they can't even exercise their just right while entering into political arena. The question now is also on the conduct of the politicians. If they wanted democracy and wanted to settle their political disputes in a political manner, they should have not borrowed the dictatorial legacy. This is a dictatorial legacy that they borrowed and they continued on that. So they are also equally culprit in this crime, in this lethargy. Now when we see Justice Qazi Faiziza, he took the bold step to bring clarity. This inconsistency between the legislature's legislation and the decisions of the court, this brought Justice Qazi Faiziza to intervene and make this issue clear once and for all. This will
which was needed,
yes,
which was a long time coming. Let me go to Safiullah on this. Safiullah, do you agree? You think that it should have been done much sooner? Of course, as far as this issue is concerned and the fate of so many politicians that has hung in the balance, traditionally speaking. I mean, of course, we're talking about political party heads at this time. The former Prime Minister, of course, being the main aggrieved at this time, and of course Jahangir Khan Tanin, but there have been many politicians that have come under the umbrella of the 62, Article 62 from time to time in history.
I completely agree with you, Mahrukh. I think this points to a massive failing of our imagination and also of our constitution. It pains me to think that we are here, for instance, even on your show, we continue to say this time and again, but the courts seem to be the final stop for every issue in Pakistan. Nothing seems to get resolved in the parliament. And of course, all of these things are the purview of the parliament. We are talking right now about the qualification and the disqualification of parliamentarians. Why have the parliamentarians not sat down and decided to regulate themselves? Decided that they need to have standards for themselves? Why is it up to the courts once again? And see, that's what the real problem is. The fact is that, even though the courts themselves are saying, and even though my learned friend who was just online was saying that the wisdom of several hundred parliamentarians is more than that of, half a dozen judges, whereas that is, of course, stricto sensu correct. The reality is that those half a dozen judges are the ones who actually exercise their wisdom, whereas the hundreds of the parliamentarians simply don't care about exercising any wisdom whatsoever. Because had they done so, this would not have been an issue. So the problem remains, and it keeps coming up time and again. These matters should have been resolved. I think the courts too would welcome if the parliament were to legislate clearly on all of these matters. They have the parliamentary rules that they can easily amend. They can clearly mention what they feel is the right criteria for disqualification, what they feel is the right criteria for qualification, who qualifies as Sadiq, who qualifies as Zameen. These are debates that should have been held in the parliament. Parliamentarians themselves should have debated amongst themselves. They should have amongst themselves.
We're talking about the role of parliament, and I have to, sort of go back to what happened today. I mean, that in the Senate, we talk about the role of parliament, we talk about the role of parliamentarians. When you have resolutions like the one that was passed today coming out of the Senate, one has to go back and think about the role that your parliamentarians are supposed to play, and then the kind of work that is being done or the kind of resolutions that are coming forward. Then one has to think.
And the Senate elections are also coming up. It's not like the Senate elections are too far away as well. So I don't understand why what drove the Senate to say what they did, why they decided that elections should be delayed. What was the wisdom behind that? I don't really know what the rationale was. But I agree with you 100%. Should this not be an indication enough as to how self-detrimental the parliament, both its upper and lower houses, are to themselves? They themselves don't seem to care about their own rights. Right now, they should have been fighting to install a parliament so that then a proper Senate election is held and senators come in. But instead, we see them wanting delays in elections.
But
so
Safiullah, then that goes as that we have to go back and go into how we need stronger parliaments. We need parliaments and parliamentarians that have opinions, that have, certain, are qualified. And I don't mean, like you said, in the strict sense, it doesn't mean how qualified they are, their education or not, but we need qualified politicians as far as, the etiquette of parliamentary democracy is concerned. When we have,
So Mahrukh, if you think about it, this is something that we have tried and tested and failed at. So when Musharraf took over, Musharraf imposed a requirement for educational qualification.
I'm
But then
negating that. I'm saying that education is by no means a requirement for any parliament.
I'm continuing. But then also, it was parliamentary education was made mandatory. All parliamentarians were given courses by PILDAT, and to date they are still given courses by PILDAT. In fact, PILDAT issues an annual report stating how much they have educated, how many training sessions they have held for these parliamentarians, so that they can educate them, tell them what the Constitution of Pakistan is, what their rights and responsibilities are, and what is expected of them. Shockingly, very shockingly, the reports also show that parliamentarians are not attending these training sessions. I mean, you cannot force them to obviously go and attend them, even though they're free. They're being paid for by the government of Pakistan, and they're very expensive. The government of Pakistan is paying a substantial amount for these trainings, yet the parliamentarians don't bother attending them. So who do we blame then? If they themselves are not even interested in learning what their powers are, how are we then to educate them? And how are we then to train them? And how are then to make sure that they fulfill their obligations that are expected of them by their electorate and constituents?
So and then we talk about the importance of election, Saif, and we talk about how it's so important for us to elect parliamentarians. But then, as far as democracy is concerned, it's a circular argument, and we keep on going back and saying that, let the people choose their representatives until they learn to choose better representatives. Isn't that how it's going to work?
Actually, the essence of democracy is that. But I think I'd like to disagree with what Safi said. Fine, all right, there are a lot of things that, if talked about in an educational sense, they're different. When talked about in terms of political wisdom and political sense, the political realities are very different. Now, the only problem is it's not something that makes the parliamentarians unaware of the constitution. The very idea of coming to the parliament in Pakistan is flawed. If you by legislation ensure that any person contesting for provincial assembly or national assembly has to be priorly a member of the district council, or has to be member of the Tehsil Council, then ultimately that is the nurturing process of democracy. That is evolutionary democracy at its level best. So I think next time when we talk about political wisdom and political correctness, I think there should be legislation once and for all to settle the political scores as well, that if you want to reach the highest custodian body of the constitution or the national parliament, you have to serve a particular time in the provincial assembly, and before that you have to serve a particular time in the district council as well. That is evolutionary democracy. The only issue is that there are hardly a few politicians in the parliament since more than 70 plus years who have actually been part of the district council process.
But do we want there to be that kind of political autonomy is another question for us, and the way that the dictates of our, governance works as far as our political parties work. Those are all relevant questions. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for being with us. Saif, Jamshed, Baryar, thank you for joining us. Ali Jawar, thank you for being with us today. Muneeb Qadir, thank you for joining us. Barrister Safi, Ghauri, thank you for your time. Political wisdom, political correctness. When we are going towards the elections, perhaps those are important terms to consider when electing your representatives in the next elections. Of course, with the resolution today that was moved, those are issues, those are questions that come to mind when one thinks about the next elections. When we vote, you and I vote, when the people of Pakistan vote, perhaps those considerations should also be on the forefront of their mind. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.